So, how do you get chronic fatigue? Funnily enough,
Nobody knows.
unfortunately, the answer is we don't really know. But there are lots of theories. Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. This video is going to be all about the things that can cause chronic fatigue and what caused my chronic fatigue. There's no definitive answer on what causes chronic fatigue, but there are a huge amount of theories. We're going to go through all of them. There are so many things that people think might be the cause of chronic fatigue that it's really hard to keep track of, and it's hard to know what the truth is, or even if there is a one singular truth. Maybe the answer is that lots of different things can cause chronic fatigue, or it's possible that lots of different illnesses could be under the term chronic fatigue at the moment, and in the future we will discover that they are multiple different illnesses. That is completely possible as well. So it's all up in the air at the moment. So I'm going to talk about the most common schools of thought, what the majority of people find the most convincing arguments for chronic fatigue syndrome. Okay, so the top main contenders for what are the causes of CFS include a viral infection like glandular fever or meningitis, a bacterial infection like pneumonia, physical or emotional stress on the body including traumas, a severe allergic reaction to a chemical or a toxin such as an anaesthetic, an immunodeficiency or a failure within the immune system, a hormone imbalance or a change in hormones, genetics, a general failure to produce energy, or a mitochondrial failure. So those are the ones we're going to be discussing today. There's a lot to unpack here. Who says there's a lot to unpack here? Or maybe is that just a saying? So because of the multiple theories, some people with CFS, also known as ME, know for certain, 100% sure, they know the cause of their illness, they can trace it back to the day, but other people don't know what caused their CFS. People like me. So there's differences within the community of whether you know for sure, or you just, I don't know, it just happened and I don't know. So let's talk about viruses. In a recent video, which I will link in a card and in the description, I talked about how I am afraid of catching the coronavirus because it may worsen my chronic fatigue. Now, that's because one of the main causes of chronic fatigue is cited to be a virus that your body never recovered from, a virus that you got and your body worked so hard fighting it off that it effectively never recovered from the energy it put into fighting off the virus. And lots of people can trace their illness back to a virus like glandular fever. Around 80% of CFS patients are shown to have had glandular fever prior to the onset of their condition. So that gives like fairly good evidence that glandular fever may be an important factor. However, there are other viruses that can also cause CFS, including meningitis, human herpes virus 6, rubella and Ross River virus, and arguably any other virus could cause post-viral fatigue, which then could develop into CFS. This includes coronavirus. There is some evidence to suggest that coronavirus could lead to CFS, but it's too new a virus for us to really know for sure. But it seems like viruses are a very, very common way that people get CFS, or develop it, I should say. You don't contract CFS, you can't catch it. The virus may be a trigger, but you can't catch CFS. Another virus that has been shown to be important to CFS is the XMRV virus. Around 2/3 of CFS patients tested were shown to have evidence of having the XMRV virus within their system, with only 4% of the general population. But it's important to remember that correlation is not causation. So the fact is that lots of people with CFS have evidence of the XMRV, and lots of people with CFS have also had glandular fever. But it's important to say that we don't know that one causes the other. Causation could be in the opposite direction. It is possible that people already had the CFS, which then caused them to be more likely of getting the XMRV or glandular fever. So most of the things we're going to talk about today are based on correlation rather than causal evidence. So it is hard to say whether any of these cause CFS or are caused by CFS or are just general correlation with no causal link at all. Correlational link is important and can give us lots of information. So the second possible cause I want to talk about is the bacterial infection. Now we've talked about viral infections. Those two types of infections are specifically different. They work in different ways, so they are two separate categories. So bacterial infections that can go away. So bacterial infections that might cause CFS include pneumonia, Q virus and Lyme disease. Lyme disease itself does have some similarities to CFS, but does have a more clear cause and test. Bacterial infections are not as commonly considered when thinking about the causes of CFS. Viral infections being the cause is much more common. So another factor that is important in the discussion of causes of CFS is the concept of physical and emotional stress or traumas, especially during childhood, which can have effects later on for CFS. In a study, 62% of CFS patients were found to have childhood trauma, where only 24% of non-sufferers were found to have childhood trauma. So you can see that there is a correlation in those numbers, but again, we cannot determine causation. Also, within the study itself, they discussed how they thought this finding showed a risk factor rather than a cause. What that means is people who had childhood trauma are more likely to develop CFS, but not necessarily as the primary reason that they did get CFS. The problem with all of these things is that there's no way to prove causation, because you can't do a study where you try and give someone CFS. Another factor may be allergic reactions. Dr. Myhill, who is a CFS specialist, talks a lot about how people with CFS have lower tolerances to drugs and toxins than the average person. The YouTuber Shannon Amelia has discussed multiple times how her CFS was caused by a reaction to an anaesthetic, which she was given because she had to undergo surgery. I will link her channel below. It's really good. It's all about CFS. I highly recommend you go and check it out if you haven't already. She knows exactly the date that her CFS started because it was directly linked to the day she got the anaesthetic, and she had a reaction to the anaesthetic, which actually isn't particularly discussed on the internet around CFS, though there are multiple people who have had this experience. It isn't seen as one of the main causes of CFS. The NHS website for CFS, it will not talk about allergic reactions, and that's probably because there's not enough evidence for it. But based on anecdotal evidence, it's very clear that for some people this does have a big effect and may be a trigger or a cause of their illness. Another theory of the causes of CFS is a hormone imbalance. Now, this is the most vague theory of what could cause it. There are a huge amount of hormones in the body. There's not much specific information. It mostly is a case of we don't know what it is. Maybe it's this. Though it is worth noting on the concept of hormones that the people who are most likely to get CFS are women who are either 13 to 15 or 40 to 50, which are both very hormonal times for women. Women are also 4 times more likely to get CFS than men are, and that would also indicate that hormones are a big factor because women have more hormone changes throughout their lives than men do. So another thing they found that they think could be a factor in chronic fatigue syndrome is the genetic aspect. People with ME/CFS don't seem to pass it on, but people who have family members with CFS seem to have a higher chance of developing the illness. So they're not entirely sure why. They haven't found a specific genetic or anything like that. There just seems to be a link. A here's another piece of vague information. Failure to produce energy is a reason. Maybe. So the failure to produce energy, or the mitochondrial failure, we all know what the mitochondria is.
Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
So this theory is that there's something wrong with the mitochondria. The mitochondria some way develop a fault or are damaged and therefore can't produce the amount of energy that is needed for just general life. If the mitochondria can't produce enough energy, that would explain the exhaustion that we feel. Okay, so there are about 1 million things that might cause chronic fatigue. But what caused my chronic fatigue? So in short, we don't know. So there are two main possibilities for the things that caused my chronic fatigue. But the two things we think are the most likely to have caused my chronic fatigue are a virus and trauma. So let's talk about that. So let's talk about the virus theory. So I had a virus in the end of my year 9 at secondary school when I was around 14 years old. Before the virus, I was a very healthy child and I never got sick. Then I got a virus. It wasn't glandular fever or any of the other viruses that I've stated can be a cause of chronic fatigue. It was just a generic virus. So I was off school for a long time with this virus, and when I finally got better from the virus, as my mum always says, I got everything going, meaning anytime anyone had a virus or a stomach bug or anything at all, I caught it. Before then, I had a very good immune system, and after this virus, I've just got every illness. That sounds quite a lot like a reasonable assumption that that could be something that caused my CFS. But there's a problem. I don't start seeing consistent CFS symptoms for a long time. In those summer holidays, I went on a holiday to Paris with my mum. We walked everywhere, but specifically, we walked up the Eiffel Tower. I walked all the way to the top, then we carried on, and that same day, I also walked up the steps to Sacré-Cœur. I was healthy. That doesn't really make sense. If I had CFS at that time, I wouldn't have been able to do that, right? But a couple of weeks after that trip to Paris, we went on a family holiday to Switzerland, which if you have seen my CFS story part 1 video, which I will link above and in the description, you know that one of my first ever CFS symptoms was fatigue I started to feel when I was swimming in a lake, and it got so bad I thought that I wouldn't be able to make it to the edge. I thought I was going to drown. So now the story doesn't make sense, because I had the virus, then I was fine, and then I started having symptoms. And 6 months after this Switzerland trip, when I had my first symptom of CFS, I went on a school ski trip where we skied for 6 hours a day, and I could keep up fine. I was healthy, I was great. So were the symptoms I was experiencing in Switzerland even CFS symptoms? Thinking about this story, it makes me doubt it, but in my mind, it's so clear that that was the feeling of CFS. It happened a whole year before the beginning of my CFS story, but that makes more sense with the virus. But it doesn't make sense with where the rest of my CFS symptoms start to kick in. The virus and the Switzerland symptoms happen a whole year before anything else does. So are they even related? I don't know. So the ski trip happened in year 10 and I'm completely healthy. At the end of that school year, I'm doing my first GCSE exams in science in year 10 and my granddad dies. Now this is theory number 2, trauma. Trauma of doing exams, having my granddad die, having my mum 3 hours away. What works out in the time scale? The emotional trauma and the stress that I was under coincide almost perfectly with the beginning of my illness. It happens just before I start having symptoms. We were cleaning out my grandma's house where I felt exhausted after the death of my granddad. It fits. Time-wise, it fits. But I don't know if it was traumatic. It was sad. I loved my granddad and he died and I was sad about it, but I think trauma should be a stronger word than that. I think of people's traumatic experiences. I don't feel like those things were trauma. So the time scale works, but I don't think I had a reaction to it that could have caused the CFS. Whereas for viruses, the time is completely off, but I think it caused a big enough reaction that it might have caused this. So I don't know. So those are my two theories on what caused my chronic illness. If you have a chronic illness, especially CFS, let me know in the comments what caused your illness. Is it one of the things I've said on the list, or is it something completely different? I'd love to know. Make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it or found it informational, and subscribe to my channel. We're nearly at 30 subscribers, which is very exciting for me. Remember to come back every Wednesday and Sunday for more content from me on chronic illness, mental health and lifestyle. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.